They're dead, Dave.
What, Captain Hollister?
Everybody's dead, Dave.
What, Todd Hunter? What, Selby? Not Chen.
He's dead, Dave. Everybody is dead. Everybody is dead, Dave.
Hello, welcome back to They're All Dead, Dave, the Red Dwarf review podcast. I'm Phil Hawkins.
And I'm Adam Martyn. And in case you haven't guessed, they are all dead, Dave. They really are. They're all dead.
What, even Peterson?
Even Peterson. They're all dead, Dave. They're all
What about
dead.
Rimmer?
Everyone's dead, Dave. They're all dead.
We're not going to do that at the beginning of every
Could have
episode,
done that.
I promise.
Oh, no, we probably shouldn't, no.
This is the podcast where we're going to work through every single episode of Red Dwarf. Myself being a long-time fan of the show, been watching it since the 90s. Adam has not watched it before until I made him for these episodes.
Yeah. I have never seen this show until now. I have had vague awareness of the show. I knew it was a thing. But yeah, this is my first watch-along.
So we are up to episode 2, Future Echoes, and this is the first one that sort of starts dealing with sort of sci-fi concepts that are, well-known sci-fi concepts, and dealing with them in a very comedic, Red Dwarf, very unique way. So in this episode, they go faster than light, and it results in seeing echoes from the future, as the title suggests. And we see various echoes of the characters and things happening, and they gradually work out what's going on, and hilarity ensues. So what was your initial thoughts of this episode? What was your general feelings about this episode?
I was surprised we were diving into like the hardcore sci-fi, tropes quite early on. I'm all for it. I like a good bit of sci-fi tropes, and I think the whole aspect of it, I guess, sort of got across the concept in a very accessible but funny way. I mean, a lot of the comedy of it is, particularly with Lister, he keeps asking Holly to explain things, and even when Holly does it quite simply, he's like, no, I still don't get it. And you could account for maybe casual viewers. They might not get it either, because if it's not something they're used to or engaged with, but I think that's a good way of diffusing it. I think it's easier to do that in a comedy than, say, a straight drama, where you have to make sure, the audience is understanding what's going on. Otherwise, you've arguably failed in what you're trying to teach. But no, I enjoyed it. We'll get into criticisms a bit later, but I think I have a few more criticisms of this episode than I did of the last one. But on the whole, I like it. Continues the character work we talked about in the first episode. Rimmer gets some awesome jokes and moments to shine in particular, and I like that the cat characters are more developed as well, because as we said in the last episode, I was a bit confused at first at this sort of Prince caricature sort of thing, but
yeah, well, he only turned up in the last 5 minutes of the first episode, so we didn't really get any time at all with the cat last time. But he is in this, and he plays a little bit more of a part in the plot as well, so we get to see a bit more of him. That was nice.
Yeah,
absolutely. I liked it. It was okay. I think it is not quite as strong as the first episode, and it didn't get any big laugh out loud moments from me this time around. So I don't think I found it as funny as the first episode, but it was still good, and it wasn't a bad episode. It just wasn't quite as good as the first one.
Yeah, I mean, the main, just I guess to jump into it, the main criticism I had was that, particularly with the humour, the tone seemed to shift all over the place. Like one minute, Lister's doing there's one bit in the background, he does an impression of Rimmer when he's giving him a lecture, and he's doing a very childish thing. Like we said in the last episode, it's not bad doing that sort of juvenile humour, because it fits Lister's character. He's very much in that. He'll take the pot shots where he can. But you've got things like that. And then the one that stood out to me that sort of jarred me a little bit was when Rimmer's talking about his father. He's doing the whole crew cut gag.
Oh, yeah.
And he says, a short haircut and a clean uniform, whatever it is, keeps a man right. That was before that suicide business. And I was like, And I noticed even the laugh track didn't. It was one of those where it was a small mumble. And I was like, that joke can work, but from what the episode was doing, it was very much light. It was a light at that point. It just seemed to come in like a curveball, and I wasn't ready for it. And as a result, I was sort of like, "Ooh, that's a bit."
Yeah,
I don't know.
you know what? I completely missed that joke. I don't know how I missed that.
I think it's the way he said it as well. I know it's probably the character, but he sort of says it very nonchalantly, like, "Oh, before that suicide business," and I was like, maybe it's because nowadays, obviously, I mean, it always has been, but you could argue now suicide is a very serious topic that we all, have to take into account. And I'm not saying it can't be necessarily used in a comedic way, but I think you have to be very careful in how you do it. And again, as I say, from the start, it wasn't, not all the jokes were that, sharp, dark humor. And this one just appears and it's like, oh, right, okay, we're doing that now, are we? And then 5 minutes later, you've got Lister like doing the, yeah. It's like, what are we doing? That was just me anyway, but.
Yeah, no, I can see that a bit sort of tonally inconsistent with the humor. Definitely, yeah. No, I'd agree with that. This was another episode where the plot bit of it, because with the first episode, we were talking about how the event that wipes out half the crew doesn't happen, or all the crew, sorry, does apart from Lister, doesn't happen until really late on in the episode. This is another episode where the sort of sci-fi plot element of it doesn't kick in until about halfway through, and you get a lot of initial stuff, which I'm it's not a criticism at all. It's just it's just what it is, and I think from my memory, we're watching these sort of as we're watching them and then reviewing them, so we're not sort of massively ahead or anything. So although I've seen them before, I think this is. I'm struggling to remember if this is a sort of the way it goes for most of them, but I like the fact that they do that because it gives you time to spend some more time with the characters without a crisis going on all the time, and you get to see those interactions, and especially at this early stage of the series, once they're really fully established after a series or something, and there's we know what Rimmer and Dave are like together. Then we wouldn't need it. We don't need it as much. But at this point on, I quite liked the fact that we got that and getting something from the cat as well, and establishing stuff from the cat. And talking, well, last episode we talked about setup and payoff. They're really good at that because they do that here as well with the cat sneaking around the room trying to get the fish, which pays off later when we get a future echo of him having broken his tooth and Lister realizing that, oh, he's going to try and eat my robot fish.
Yeah.
So they're really well written in that sense that they do set things up and they pay them off. The things that you don't necessarily notice or think are significant early on play quite well into the ending of the episode or some point in the episode.
And building on that, I mean, one of the strongest scenes for me was when you first discover about the future echoes, that whole thing, Lister's talking to Rimmer, but they're out of sync and then they sync up. Because, I mean, from an acting standpoint, that scene must have been so tricky to learn, what to say in what order. But, I mean, they pull it off flawlessly, I mean, they don't miss a beat,
Yeah, are you talking about the one in the control room? Or are you talking
like
about
the first,
because the mirror happened first.
It did, yes, you're right. No, I meant the control room scene, yeah.
Yeah, that was good.
They've got that, yeah.
I was gonna ask you later on, but I'll do it now because I mean that was my favorite scene of the episode.
Oh, the control room scene.
The control room scene where initially Rimmer is talking as if he's talking to Dave, but not the Dave that we can see. Dave in a different direction sometimes, and that the sentences don't match up as a reply to what Dave has said, and then that Rimmer walks off. And in from the other side walks Rimmer and has the same conversation again, but this time with Dave. Yeah. It's, like you say, it must have been really hard to act because, this is before technology would have allowed them to use the same scene, record it once. That was recorded twice.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And again, Chris Barry is just really good at his timing and getting it. If you watch them like literally next to each other, you would notice some slight differences. But watching it after each other, like it appears in the episode, you don't notice any differences between the two portrayals.
Absolutely. I mean, even as in, when Chris Barry's technically doing it for the second time, his intonations are almost, spot on as to how they were the first time. Because, I mean, it's funny. Actors often get chided like, oh, each time you've got to make it different, make it different. And it is, it's a constant challenge because you've got to think on your feet. How am I going to say this differently? But this is the opposite one where he's basically told to say it exactly the same. But as an actor myself, like, when it's drilled in so much, you've got to make it different. That must have been so hard for him. Like, his brain's saying, say that line differently, give it a different thought. But he's got to be like, no, I have to say it literally exactly as I said it. And as you say, if you stacked them up side by side, you'd probably notice one or two slight differences. But I thought for the whole, like, the way he held himself, the intonation of the voice and the words was pretty much spot on.
This was also the first episode we really got what will become a bit of a trope of talking equipment with its own AI, separate from Holly the ship. We had a vending machine with a lisp in the beginning. They all have like these quirky personality quirks. And then we got the first appearance of Talkie Toaster as well, who will appear again. The
first appearance. On. Oh, yes.
First appearance. I'm teasing you here. The Talkie Toaster will return.
Yes.
And I just love these. The every like mundane item of the ship, down to a toaster, has its own artificial intelligence and its own personality. It's just, it leads to so much great humor, and there's a lot of potential in that, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, even I know they don't talk necessarily, but one of my contender for my favorite scene was even with the scuttlers near the end. When they say they give that note to Dave saying, "Don't leave us on the ship with Rimmer," and he's saying he can't. They just start banging their heads against the wall. I was like, oh my god! But again, that's a great idea of introducing a personality. It's a great way, I think, of saying, yes, you can have AI machinery that speak, but there's also a lot of comedy in AI machines that don't speak, and it's about doing it right. And I don't know why, but the image of just this little hand grabber thing smashing its head against a wall because it doesn't want to stay with Rimmer, it really made me chuckle.
And they were a great example of how much personality you can give to something that doesn't even speak, and just with like what is effectively puppetry or remote control, so much that there are only, on the surface there are only 4 characters in this show, but there are so many more because of these elements.
Absolutely, yeah, for sure. Just to dive into the cat a little bit, if that's all right.
Yeah.
In the last episode, for those who listened, I sort of said, when I first saw him, I thought it was more of like a caricature of stars of the day, like Prince or Michael Jackson in the late 80s. But having thought on it, it reminded me of someone else. Have you ever seen the film Mannequin?
Oh, where yes, with I can't remember her name. That Samantha off of Sex and the City, isn't it? She's a mannequin that comes to life.
It's one of my biggest guilty pleasures and one of my favourite films. It's so silly, but I love it. But there's a character in that called Hollywood, who is this very, well, he's gay, but obviously, late 80s, they don't explicitly say it. But he's very, he's a black guy, he's very flamboyant, very like all the hands and very over the top. And he's a great character. The only thing that lets Mannequin down is I can't remember exactly what they say, but there's certain lines where they basically take the mick out of him being gay, which is, it was the late 80s, it was a different time, it's a shame, but it was there. And it's sort of, the cat sort of reminds me more of that sort of, I'm not saying the cat, I don't know if the cat's gay or not, but you know what I mean? That sort of over flamboyance. And I wonder if, again, because they made this I think this series was 1988, if I've got my dates right, certainly the late 80s. I can't help but think, yes, you could say it's that feline aspect, because I got more of that feline aspect than I did in the first episode. First episode, it felt more, I think I said, like a flamboyant human. This one, I sort of got more of like the cat-like movements and stuff. But
yeah, and they got that nice bit. Talking of feeling more like a cat, they had the bit where he's looking through Dave's pictures on the screen, and he comes across a picture of a dog, and his reaction to that, and he's like, "What's that?" And there's this like primal, instant. Like in his genes, he knows that he does not like this animal that he's never encountered before.
Yeah, it just makes me think again. Like I think back to episode 1. Had say he come into the ship through the vent and then maybe done like a cat sort of crawl across the floor, I would have got it straight away. And the thing that made me compare it to Hollywood from Mannequin, it's the scene where Dave's talking about going back into stasis and he brings his rack of very colourful suits. And I mean, that was almost, it felt like scene for scene, because obviously Hollywood is a fashion designer. So I think there is a scene in Mannequin where he's, got a rack of outfits and stuff. And I felt this is very deja vu. And I can't help but wonder if the way the cat was devised, obviously to be feline, as we said, like you gave a great example with seeing the dog, that sort of cat primal instinct to recoil. I do wonder, and I mean, aficionados have read all the books and behind the scenes might be able to tell me, I wonder if maybe that sort of, if you like, gay stereotype of the time might have, that whole very flamboyant and like this and gotta be, oh, I'm looking fabulous today. Sort of that, you see it in old films now with gay characters. They're all very much, I'd argue a lot of them are in that same boat of being just very, like this, and they have to be over the top and they have to be flamboyant and they have to be, do you know what I mean? I mean, that could just be me as a looking back on it. But what did you think at the time? Like when you first, did you draw that, or was it not there at all?
When I first watched it, I don't know, because I was a kid. I don't really think I thought about it that much. I just thought,
that's fair.
It was an over the top sort of.
It's this
character.
cynical brain of mine, you see.
yeah. It is the kind of thing that I probably would think if I was watching it for the first time now, which is why it's great, that we've got this different sort of perspective on it, because you're watching it for the first time. I'm watching it and thinking, things don't occur to me because I've seen them so many times, or, I'm expecting them, whereas they're a surprise to you. So that's why it's great having you here to talk a bit, see those different perspectives.
I mean, disclaimer for the audience, I'm not saying that portrayal is necessarily bad, because again, as from what I've seen so far, it's not stated that this character is gay. If maybe from the off, they said this character's gay and it was this portrayal, then maybe be a bit more like, this is a bit stereotypical of the time. But because it's sort of left ambiguous at this point, it's not bad. It's just what I'm drawing to from what else I've seen from that era. It just feels very much like we've got a ambiguous character, he's got to be big, he's got to be all this and the flashy suits, but that's just from what else I've seen of that era.
Yeah, there is, I don't know, I can't speak to what the intention was at the time, but certainly there is scenes in the more recent Dave era of Red Dwarf where he's definitely not gay. or at least not well, I mean, I can't say for certain that he's straight, but he's definitely not he might be bisexual for all we know, but he there is one scene, and I can't remember which series it's in, but he is seen in bed with two women. So
fair enough. But again, like that is just my brain analyzing it. It's my first time watching it. I'm sure, honestly, if I'd watched it as a kid like yourself, I probably would have never crossed my mind. Yeah. But it's just, I think it was that particular scene with the rack of suits, because I love Mannequin so much as a film, and I just got major deja vu, and I was like, that's what I'm thinking of, like, comparison-wise. The other thing that jarred me a bit was, and this sounds so silly now, but there's a bit where, when Rimmer discovers what he looks like with his new hairdo, and he says, I look like I'll say he looks like a complete tit. And obviously, like, I've not got a problem with that word, but I was surprised for the very, uptight BBC of the late 80s that such a word could exist. But then I wrote in my notes, I said, but what was the stance on language like that back in the day,
Well, I mean, I don't know. I don't think tit has ever been a massively taboo word, particularly. And this is a sitcom aimed at predominantly an adult audience. So
well, I was going to say, did it used to air past the watershed, or
I'm pretty sure it did. Well, I don't know. No, well, maybe not past the watershed, but like past
like later evening
slot, sort of maybe. It wasn't like tea time entertainment. It was evening. I would love to. Maybe I should look up when it.
I think that's different experiences again, because like again for me in school, like that it was a sort of a taboo word in school. Like if you sort of said even I fell arse over tit, very common phrase when you fall over. Like you'd get in my school you'd get told off for that. You're like, you don't say that word. So I think maybe that's just the way the way I grew up. It was sort of a taboo thing. So I think. As you say, like it's really not. It's a 3-letter word, and it's funny. It's saying you look stupid. I know it has its other connotations as well, but I think because of the nature of the show so far, I think it just caught me off guard a little bit. Just as a surprise thing, like, oh, okay, like we're doing that then. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know if in the future series they do have like stronger language or anything like that.
Well, they tend to they tend to use like substitutes. So you know how sci-fi shows often come up with a word that means you know what it means, or you know what it's a substitute for.
Well, it's like Smeghead, isn't it? Or like
Well,
Smeghead
that's
L,
yeah, exactly.
you
Smeg is the one that they go to more often, so that's kind of like becomes their swear word.
Yeah.
But so that they can use it without actually using a real one.
Absolutely.
I'm trying to find a list of episodes and when they aired to like see what time of day
See,
they
I'm
aired.
I'm thinking when I did my ident review of the Red Dwarf idents, I think I used a very brief clip that actually was from like the original show's trailer that like had the time. So if you give me 1 second. Oh no, there you go. Red Dwarf, Monday at 9 p.m. on BBC Two.
No, so it is after the Watershed.
Oh well, that explains it then. I just
Firmly
wasn't
an adult
sure
show.
because I think often you can sort of. I think often it's you can tell when a show's aired after the Watershed, but honestly with this one so far, I was the same as you. I thought, oh yeah, late evening, maybe like 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock. But no, according to that trailer, it was 9 p.m. So yeah, okay, that explains the language then. So
Yeah,
fair enough.
I think
It probably explains
tits are allowed for the adults.
Tits are allowed for the adults. It probably explains the darker humour we touched upon earlier, because, I mean, yeah, I don't know whether you would have got away with the maybe that suicide joke pre-Watershed. I don't know, but
Yeah, another thing I really liked about this episode, and we touched on this last week as well, is the way that it sort of calls forward and sets up stuff for not only like the payoff in this episode, but it also sets up stuff that, and this is again a little bit spoiler, but I can't not talk about it. Stuff that will happen in future episodes and even future series of the show.
okay.
So one of the forward echoes, future echoes, is a picture of Dave Lister with 2 babies.
It is.
Now that will play into a later episode, and it's. I would love to know if the writers of it planned that at this point, or if they just put that in as the gag and just part of this episode, and then later on thought, we could go back to that.
Yeah, it's quite a clever setup in a way, because, I mean, all you see of that in the episode is the initial picture, and then obviously the end of the episode where we do get a future echo of Dave with the 2 children and he takes the photo. But like you say, it doesn't definitively say, oh, well, that's that then. It's just, here's the future echo and here's the photo. So yeah, it sounds like, I mean, as I say, I don't know either, but it does sound like a clever bit of script writing saying, we're addressing it now, but we're also leaving it open if we want to come back to it. So, I mean, you know more than me. My initial guess on it, I think they'll bring it back up this season, but obviously I don't know. It could be next season after that. So I'd be curious to see when it appears.
I can't remember
we'll
when
find out together as we go back through.
It's been so long since I've watched them that that I can't really remember. But yeah, it's nice. It's nice that they do those sort of things, and that's Red Dwarf is a show that is very sort of respectful to its own history, in the sense that it likes to randomly and out of nowhere reference something that happened years ago on the show.
Lovely.
And I love that. It's so good, and obviously we're not going to start seeing that start to pay off until we get a bit further in, but it is really nice. And actually, I say that, but actually already this episode starts paying off stuff that I'm referencing back to the first episode, because there is a line from Rimmer, because there's a plot point where in these future echoes, Rimmer sees Dave die, so he's delighting in this and like mocking him, and just delighting in the fact that he's going to die and he doesn't know when it's going to happen. And he references a line that Dave said to him in the first episode, which I can't remember. I didn't write it down exactly, but it was something along the lines of, "Oh, death isn't the hindrance to your career it used to be," or something along those lines.
Okay.
And that was something that Dave said to Rimmer when he first appeared as a hologram, and Rimmer was in the first episode being really upset about being a hologram. And now he says it back to Dave, and I just like the fact that they're already referencing back to their previous episodes when they only have one of them, and just those little moments which might go unnoticed, but I think I only noticed because I literally watched these 2 episodes back to back.
Yeah, maybe it's that connecting link. But just drawing on that scenario, he's saying of almost from a sort of taunting Dave, that he's seen him die. I think that example of like the more black humor works because it's built upon, it's not just a one line and done. Like it's this whole gag of he's going like, oh, like you're gonna die, and it like when he's doing like the funeral march thing, he's pretending to like carry the coffin, like when they're in the control ship. But I think that felt more earned because you'd built to it compared to, as I said earlier, with that whole the suicide line, which is literally a one line and done. It's not built up to, it's not preambled with, it's just there. And I think that's why it feels a bit more jarring to me. Like if, I don't know, but I mean, I think it all depends on the circumstance. We know these two already, like they're fine, but they'll take any chance to fire pot shots at each other. We know that from watching it. So I think that's where that sort of dark humor feels a bit more earned than just throwing in a random line about suicide.
Yeah. I don't actually have that much more about this episode. It was kind of just an okay episode. I liked the fact that they had this sort of starting to bring in the sort of sci-fi concepts and doing their twist on it. What about you? Is there anything else you had that you wanted to say?
No, I mean, I think I cover most of my points there, really, sort of similar to you. I mean, props to them for going for the hardcore sci-fi with episode 2. And I think, again, for the most part, they handled it really well using the whole comedy element to get it across to maybe, some audience members who may not be as up to par on their sci-fi as, say, like me or you. But yeah, it's just the random shifts in like tones of jokes and like just little other things that sort of brought it down a bit for me from episode 1.
Yeah, definitely. Who was your one thing I haven't asked? We talked about favorite moments, but what was your favorite character in this episode?
My favorite character in this one? Oh, it was old Dave.
Oh, old Dave, yes, one of the last Future Echo.
Yeah, I just sort of liked how like sort of done and sarcastic he was, and how he obviously plays Rimmer at the end, so, oh, you want to know what happens to you? Then he just laughs and fades away. It's just I like, was that was Craig Charles, wasn't it, in a lot of makeup? Yeah, I found it hard to tell for the first few seconds. I was like, I'm not sure if this is a different actor but then I did think this does look and sound like Craig Charles. But yeah, I liked it because again, he made the most of a very small character, a character who's only in it for about a minute, just to spread a message. It could have been a very one and done performance, but he absolutely sold it. And I hope we see old Dave again. I'd like to see old Dave.
My favourite character in this episode, last time I almost picked Holly. This time I am picking Holly.
He was a close second for me.
He was second. Yeah, he was in a lot more of this episode than last episode, which is why I picked him for this one, not the last one. And I liked his whole bit about when he was trying to navigate at light speed and how difficult it was, and it was all very stressful and everything. And he's meant to be a computer with an IQ of 6 billion or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And he's deadpan nature again in this. So funny. It's absolutely brilliant.
There was 2 PE references which caught me out. The one where he said, oh yeah, 6,000 IQ, which is about the equivalent of 6,000 PE teachers. That made me chuckle.
Yes.
No offence against any PE teachers out there. But
if you're a PE teacher listening, we apologise on behalf of the Red Dwarf script editors.
Yeah. And the other one was, what was it? Oh, do you want me to help you with your homework? Want me to sew your name into your PE kit? So... Which made me laugh because I think my mum did do that back in the day. She sewed my name into my PE kit.
Yeah.
So, no, Holly had some great sort of like one-liners and quips. I think the only thing he said, and I think he said it in episode 1 as well, that maybe slightly dates this era of Red Dwarf is when he says Gordon Bennett. Because I'm aware, isn't that a real like late 80s slang term?
It is a slang term, but I think it goes back longer. I think it's like one of those slang terms that was around in like the 1920s and stuff.
Oh, right, okay.
And therefore would, like, depending on... I'm aware of it, but then again, I'm a little bit older than you, and and I was around in the 90s, and
No, true. I mean, it was definitely something that was never said, like, when I was at school. I mean, I only heard it from the character of Ace in Doctor Who came from 1980s Perivale. So I think when she first said it, I was like, who's Gordon Bennett? And then I had to do some research and be like, oh, it's a phrase, right?
it's not something I've ever said, but it's, or at least not unironically. Like, yeah, I may have said it in a kind of like, oh yeah, I'm being ironic and saying it, because to me it sounds like in my head it's a very northern phrase.
Okay.
I
I've always
don't know
seen it as
why.
like that sort of Cockney thing, the Cockney
Oh, it could
rhyming
be.
slang
Yeah,
almost,
Cockney
yeah.
as well. Yeah, no, okay, it would
Yeah.
work with Cockney as well.
I
Yeah.
think maybe why I say it's dated then, maybe it's just, again, my association with it is I've only ever heard it in like things to do with the 80s. So maybe that's
Yeah.
why I'm thinking, oh, that shows why Red Dwarf was made in 1988, because he's saying things like Gordon Bennett. But aside from that, I mean, again, if you look past the obvious, like the size of like the computer screens and some of the like the video effects stuff, aside from that, it holds up pretty well in terms of like the, effects sort of stuff. Or
Yeah.
the look of it.
Yeah, I think it does. I think it does hold up. It's not a strong an episode as the first one, but it's still, okay. What would you give it how many scuttlebugs out of 5 would you give this episode?
How many scuttlebugs? I think I would give this one 3 scuttlebugs out of 5. Only because, again, it's like not as strong as episode 1, which granted, that was hard to do. Episode 1 had a great start up. And for me, it's just as we said earlier, the sort of shifts in tone. Again, some of the humour just not matching up for me. And I think in some moments it sort of showed, how I said at first, I thought, oh, if it's only 3 or 4 of them on a ship, how can you sustain that for a season? I think there were parts of this episode that made me think that. And if I'm thinking that at episode 2, that's not necessarily the best time. You want to be thinking that like episode 5 or 6 at the very earliest. But it didn't last for long. I mean, to talk about its strengths, as we said, the leads are great. They further that relationship, that chemistry. The scene in the control room we talked about with Rimmer and Lister, the whole future echo aspect of that, I thought was great. We got some more characterization of the cat. Old Dave, favourite character. Holly's one-liners. There is good in it. But yeah, I'd give it a 3 just because it didn't leave as much of an impact as episode 1 did.
For me, it was. I have also given it a 3. If this continues, people are just going to think I'm just copying the score every single time. Maybe I'll go first next time. But yeah, I've also given it a 3, and it just didn't make me laugh out loud, like the first episode did in places. Not that there weren't amusing moments. There were same sort of moments. I think you just mentioned, like that scene where in the control room where like future Rimmer is talking, but past Rimmer is there, and those kind of scenes are really funny. And the stuff with Holly is all good stuff. And the stuff with the cat, it was good to see a bit, because we were only introduced to him in the last 5 minutes of the last episode. We actually got a bit more of a sense of him. So as an episode that kind of gives us a more of a feeling of the characters, it was, it did its job, I think.
Yeah.
But it wasn't, one that I will go, wow, that was an amazing episode, and it will be in my top 10.
Yeah, it delivered on like the sci-fi. It got that the title of the episode, Future Echoes, it got that concept across well, but whereas it did well there were just the other areas that sort of bring it down.
And then I've got one more question, which is a feature I'm going to try out. Might not be every episode, but
yeah, let's
just
see
how it goes. What would Dave Lister do? I'm calling this.
Yes.
What would Dave Lister do in a situation that we, in our world of current events, might find ourselves in? So, very topical. This is going to date this podcast, of course. But what would Dave Lister do in the current global pandemic that we are in, as we are recording this episode in the beginning of 2021?
The pandemic that never ends. What would he do? Honestly, like, I think he'd get the TV on, Boris being like, oh yes, we've got a national lockdown, and he'd just be like, oh, do you know what? And I think he'd try and watch, what's that sport he likes, the zero gravity.
Oh, yeah.
Say if that existed in the pandemic, I think his first thought would be, I'll just watch that all day. And then when they say sports have had to be cancelled, he'd be like, what? What am I going to do then? And I think he'd spend a lot of time in his bunk, just, smoking cigarettes, looking at his posters, and then I think he'd actually go out by accident and then have to be reminded it's like, nope, you can't go outside. And yeah, I just think he'd sort of bumble through it. Do you know what I mean? He'd get by somehow, but I don't think he'd do a great deal necessarily.
Yeah. It's interesting because obviously he will develop a little bit more as a character, but I think in this feature we always have to think of him as he is at the moment we're up to. And I think at this point, certainly, he's always going to be a bit of a slob, but he is a slob. And so I don't think he would handle the washing of the hands very well.
Oh, no.
He would, to be honest, I don't think he would even clock that it was happening. I think he'd be quite oblivious to it for a lot of the time until actually you saying about that sports thing has made me think that would be the thing. He'd be like months into the pandemic and not even realise there was one. And then suddenly his sports wouldn't be on and he would be like, what's going on? And it would take him another full day to find out from somebody that why the sports weren't on.
And he'd definitely only get takeaway meals.
Yeah.
I can see it. He wouldn't cook. He'd just be like, I'm not going to the shops. I'm just going to order it all in, Deliveroo, whatever. Like that. I mean, like, you know, that's not, I'm not trying to shade anyone who maybe did order more takeout. We all did. We all ate a lot more during lockdown. I know I certainly did. But, yeah, I mean, that's just what he'd do. He'd just be like, oh, what will make me feel better? Oh, I know, like, you know, a takeaway or like having a cigarette whilst watching something on the screen. I just think, like, you know, like a lot of us, not for the worst necessarily, but he'd just slouch on through it. He'd just do his best.
Yeah. Well, I think that's all we've got to say on this episode, Future Echoes, episode 2. I hope you're enjoying the podcast. If you are, don't forget to give us a like or a share it around on social medias. Talking of the interweb and stuff, where else on Tinternet can they find you, Adam?
What else on the Tinternet? Well, you can find me on YouTube at Adam Martyn. That's Martyn with a Y. Just type that in. I should pop up. Same on Twitter. Adam Martyn Actor is my handle. You can catch up with what I'm doing there, and I'll be promoting this show and doing the work on my channel as well. And I forgot to mention last week, I also run a podcast called AMTV Radio, which is just... I have a guest on each week, and we talk about whatever we want to talk about. That could be about the person's work. It could be about... anything. And Philip here, my co-host, was actually my very first guest. So
I was just about to say.
You were about to segue in.
I was about to segue in with, oh yes, I've heard of that podcast. I've heard the first episode is particularly good.
I think the first episode is still the most viewed episode.
Oh well, excellent.
So what can you say? You know. So, but yeah, so I mean, if you enjoy me and Philip talking here, well, you're gonna love the first episode of AMTV Radio because it's a whole hour of me and Philip talking. But no, you can check me out there. But otherwise, yeah, just keep coming back to this one because I will be here.
Excellent. And you can find me, if you're not already listening, on my YouTube channel where I'm going to put this up. If you're listening on some other platform, you can find my YouTube channel where I talk about Doctor Who, Star Trek, the MCU, all that kind of geeky stuff that I like to consume. Over at it's just my name, Philip Hawkins. Unfortunately, there are other Philip Hawkinses on YouTube, but I don't know what they're playing at. How dare they? But I'm the one in front of the TARDIS roundels. If you look at the little image, it's me stood in front of some TARDIS roundels. Oh God, and now I can't change my image, can I? I can't ever change my image because if someone's listening to this podcast in 2 years' time, they then won't be able to find me.
No, all you need to do is update your TARDIS roundels. That's all you got to do.
Yeah, different TARDIS roundels. That's
different
it.
TARDIS roundels.
From different TARDISes. It was but it's an actual photo in front of the at the Doctor Who exhibition. So, which is no longer there. I can't go back and get a new photo.
I know, such a shame.
I know. Anyway, thanks for watching, listening, whatever you're doing, and we will be back for episode 3 next time.
We shall. See you later.